There you go. So the outline for today is Mike Furlow will be talking a little bit about the value of the copyright review projects for HathiTrust, about the mission and purpose, and some of the ways that books are open in HathiTrust without having the copyright review, and then talking a bit about the viewability. After that, we will take a break for questions, and I will continue talking about with a brief intro to the CRMS project history, copyright projects, and then getting really into our plan for the next 2 years, what we're going to be working on. We will then take a break for questions if you want to ask more about the candidates of the projects we're working on. And then I'm going to finish up with a high-level overview of what the copyright review process looks like, a little bit of the tools that we use, and how staffing and participation in the projects works. So that's our plan for today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks. I had to get my microphone unmuted. Just Christina, microphone check. Is this sounding okay? Can you hear me fine?
You sound great.
Okay, great. So thanks to everybody for joining. I was looking over the registration list a little while ago, and I think a number of you are probably familiar with how we manage copyright review and how HathiTrust approaches this, but I think this will be a good review. And for those of you who are new to the topic and new to HathiTrust, welcome. And I'm glad to have a chance to talk to you. The first thing I like to do, because my title is Executive Director, is I always like to talk about the mission of HathiTrust and relate that to what we're doing. And I think HathiTrust has very much a mission that is a library mission. We're about enabling preservation and access of the cultural and scholarly record. I think of us as having a dual focus, that as a partnership of really over almost 120 research libraries now, we're collaboratively building a public good, and at the same time we're developing some common good services that are for the benefit of HathiTrust members. And I think the key to what we do is the fact that we have built this large infrastructure, or this significant infrastructure, to aggregate digital content, largely digitized from the collections of research libraries in North America, and that through this preservation and access, process, we're able to tackle problems at a much larger scale. Once you have built this aggregation, you can certainly provide access to some of the content, but what you're also able to do is tackle problems that you could not tackle before because you've got so much data at your disposal. And copyright review is a good example of that. Christina is still driving the slides, so I'm going to ask Christina if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide now, and we can take a look at the nature of the collection right now as of earlier today. And roughly 14.7 million items, digitized books, volumes, we like to say, you would like to say, are digitized and available in some form in HathiTrust. That equates down to about 7.3 million unique book titles, 400,000 serials, 760,000 federal documents. And of course, not everything that's in HathiTrust is available in full view, but about 5.6 million items are. Most of those have been identified as being no longer protected by copyright or having had a Creative Commons license applied to them. And I always remind people the collection is mostly published materials, mostly in bound form, mostly digitized from library collections. So we can go on to the next slide, and I'll be able to here talk to you a little bit about how we determine the view status of a book in HathiTrust. This is something we do automatically with every item that's deposited in the collection. First thing we do is we look at the metadata, specifically information in our MARC record that tells us where the item was published, when it was published, the format, and whether or not it is identified as a publication of the US government. What this algorithm does is it examines specific fields in the bibliographic record to look for these criteria, and if they're met, according to this table, if a work is published in the US, predates 1923, we will identify it as public domain and put it in full view status, for example. But if a work was published after 1923 and it's not a federal document, we'll mark it in copyright and put that in limited view. So those first three columns have to be met in order, or have to be met in order for that status to be assigned to it. So um, these dates that we have here are based on current copyright law in the United States as well as prevailing copyright laws worldwide. But they're also based on our judgment about the likelihood of a work to be in copyright, especially with foreign works. And what we do is always err on the side of caution. We mark an item as in copyright or undetermined if we really can't be confident in the assignment of a full view or public domain full view status to it. So this means that there are very likely works that were published in the United States after 1923 that are quite possibly in the public domain. We just don't know it yet. Similarly, there are probably works published outside of the United States in the early 20th century, which are quite possibly in the public domain in their country. However, without knowing a little more about the origin of the work and the author of the work and whether or not they are alive or dead, we can't, or when they died rather, we can't really assign a copyright status to it. So we'll simply mark it and come back to it later on. One thing I will note here is that even though state documents are often able to be opened and put in full view, and in some states are always considered to be part of the public domain, they're not automatically in all states, and the laws regarding copyright status of state documents will vary. And so that's one reason why in the project we'll be talking about starting today, we are including a focus on US state publications. So Christina, let's take a look at the next slide, which gives you a chance to understand the scale or the scope of the collection according to its view status. So after 6 years, right, or more, actually more like 8 years of copyright investigations, and more than that of mass digitization, what we're finding is that the collection generally is shaking out to be about 60% in limited view and about 40% in full view. And those numbers will fluctuate throughout the year depending upon what particular collections are deposited at a time, but it does seem to break out this way. So we do make a distinction here between works that are in the public domain worldwide and those that are only in the public domain in the US. US federal documents are not afforded copyright protection, and therefore those are also in full view. And you can see here this tiny little sliver, just barely see it probably, of items that have had a Creative Commons license applied to them. In fact, 0.2% of the entire collection is a pretty substantial number of volumes, and there are a lot of rights holders who have contacted us to open up the collection. So I think that one other thing I want to mention here is that, coming back to this point, that within that limited view pie, the blue part there are again works that we think could probably be opened. They are possibly in the public domain, but we really need to find ways of, we really have had to find out, really do investigations on that. And so the copyright review programs that we've undertaken and that we're talking about today are really about ascertaining the right status of our collections and enabling us to understand and better provide access to the collection. So on the next slide, we just highlight a few things that my predecessor, John Wilkin, has often highlighted during his tenure at HathiTrust. In 2011, he wrote a paper that Clear published, and the title was Bibliographic Indeterminacy and the Scale of Problems and Opportunities of Rights and Digital Collection Building. Not exactly pithy, but what's great about this is it kind of introduced this term bibliographic indeterminacy into my vocabulary. And it's really kind of, it's a nice way of saying sometimes our metadata isn't as good as we would like it to be. What we have always based our work, our understanding of copyright law, again, as I said earlier, is based on place of publication, data publication, and a couple of other factors about where and how it was produced. Um, Really, knowledge of the status of rights has been of works in library collections has really not been very good. That's because we've had, frankly, a pretty decentralized mechanisms for registering copyright status. You may have registered with the United States Copyright Office. I shouldn't say they're decentralized. I should say we've had reasons, or rather processes for registering copyright, but the mechanisms for searching out copyright status have always been really cumbersome, right? We don't have like a single place you can go to and easily, and I put the emphasis on easily, investigate the copyright status of works. You often have to make a couple of different checks. And what that does is it really inhibits our ability to make the maximum use of the collections in our libraries. And so one of the things that we started looking at very early in the history of HathiTrust was how we could make an investment in fostering the maximum use of our collection resources. Where we're not certain about right status, getting a better handle on that. And by doing so, we would really be, I think, fulfilling the promise of the copyright law in the United States, fulfilling promise of the public domain. You'll recall that the Constitution states that for the purpose of promoting progress of the sciences and useful arts, creators will be granted a limited monopoly on the use of their materials for a limited time. And the point there is you incentivize researchers or individuals to create things of utility, and then eventually the public gets to enjoy the benefit of them without recompense to those rights holders. Over time, copyright duration has extended. We know now that copyright status is generally about 95 years in the United States after the work was published. And so over time, we've just had to assume in libraries that more and more works are not in the public domain, and we are not able to make the uses of them we might want to make. Certainly, we have fair use available to us, but that isn't always sufficient to be able to do some of the things you'd like to do, like display a book in full. So, coming back to the point I made earlier about HathiTrust being a way to build off of the scale of a digital aggregation, copyright investigations we felt like needed to be driven by a scalable approach. We needed to be able to tackle and define some methodologies for investigating the right status of works in HathiTrust. Ways that could be, if not mechanized, at very least routinized, and could be done quickly, could be done effectively, could be done efficiently, and with a high degree of confidence in the outcome of it. And so that is part of our effort to make a commitment to the public good, to continue to develop that public good. And what has been fantastic is that so many libraries over the past 8 years or so have been really willing to engage in this work. It's really been a collaborative project, and maybe one of the best examples of collaborative work in HathiTrust that we have. So I have one more slide I just want to show you here, and then Christina will pick this back up. This is giving you a kind of a thumbnail view of publication date and view status for works in HathiTrust. For most of these bars, they're giving you a count of the number of works in HathiTrust that were published in that particular decade. And the works that are in the orange color, at least on my screen, they're orange, are open, and those in the darker blue are in limited view or determined to be in copyright. And you can see very clearly here the 20th century problem, right? That so much of the works that we have in our collections are still held under copyright. Rights holders still exercise rights controls over them. And maybe even rights are still exerted, or we have to assume that rights are under the control of rights holders, even if we don't know who those rights holders are. But inside that green box that we've drawn on here, there's a window of opportunity to explore the right status and begin to open up materials that do not currently meet the criteria for copyright status in the United States. And so that's what we're going to focus on for the remainder of this project. What we're aiming to do is relaunch a program of copyright review for works on U.S. publications, and aiming to get at least 100,000 items in HathiTrust reviewed over the next couple of years, and likely we'll be able to do more than that. But let me stop there. We have time for questions in case you have any. And if not, we will move on and Christina will pick it up to talk about how we do copyright review and the accomplishments we have so far. And as a reminder, you can type your questions in the chat window. On my screen, the chat window is openable on the right side of the screen by clicking that little cartoon voice box.
Thank you, Mike. And after we have time for questions, then we'll continue in talking about the candidate pools that we'll be working on, and we'll be talking a little bit about the history of what we have worked on, what we have opened up as well.
Good. If there aren't any questions, then why don't we go ahead and move on then, and I'll let you pick it up.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so yes, exactly. Copyright review programs have been working on that category of limited view volumes, and we are attempting to identify as many in that category where legally possible. We can open them up, primarily because we've identified that they're public domain. So the prior projects that we've worked on have been going on since 2008. So yes, 8 years we've been working on this. Every year we've been able to update rights for at least 60,000 books a year. And that transfers into the HathiTrust rights database and updates rights statuses. The prior projects have been, the first one we worked on was the same one we're coming back to again in the coming year, was CRMS US. That was working on US publications, monographic works from 1923 to 1963. That one was, I believe, over 200,000 volumes were looked at. And then the second major project was looking at CRMS World, reviewing UK, Canada, and Australia publications. And the time period for that was prior to 1943 for the UK and prior to 1963 for Canada and Australia. Those projects were a series of 3 national leadership grants that we are very thankful to the Institute for Museum and Library Services for funding that. The last grant also enabled publication of a toolkit, which I will show you in just a minute. And so the grant periods are up. We are just wrapping up the work on CRMS World by the end of this December. We have about 4,300 left in that queue, which for us is very nearly done. It's getting very exciting to be done. So we're looking forward to what we can come back to next. On these projects, we chose to work where we anticipated we would get good public domain results. So again, this is one of the modes we work in for working at scale and trying to have efficient review. So in some copyright review projects, you might be working on, one of the goals might be to predict future public domain. We are in fact just trying to identify things that we can open up now, and anything that might become public domain in the future, we're leaving that for future review. So our focus is on immediate results that we can get. Currently, we will be seeking new reviewers for the next cycle. We will be starting 2 projects. One is again going back to the US monographs 1923 to 1963. Although we got that queue to 0 in the spring of 2014, through the action of libraries depositing new ingest into HathiTrust, we've had that pool come back up again. So we have about 78,000 candidates, again, awaiting review in that category. And we're also going to be working on US state government documents, which up until now has been a small pilot project. We've seen a lot of interest in it from researchers for those types of documents, and we're getting really good public domain results. And so we felt that was just a natural thing to work on as well. So we will be seeking reviewers. Most of the training is going to begin on January 25th. The 2 projects monographs and state documents are going to be run separately. So reviewers will pick one to work on, and we're seeking the majority of effort will be needed on the monographic works 23 to 63. But we are looking for about 5 people who would be interested in working on state government documents. So if anybody has a passion for working on state government information, we would like to hear from you. The training for that one will be starting a little bit earlier. We're planning on fitting that in mid-November. So it might also depend upon your availability of reviewers of which one you can work on. So for the rest of them, for the majority of the training, we are looking to start around January 25th after ALA midwinter. And I'll go into more detail on that later as well. The results of all our projects to date, we've done over 600,000 total determinations. About 53% of those have been public domain and able to open them up. And as I said before, we have a direct line to the HathiTrust rights database. And by the next day, those volumes are opened up as full text if they're public domain. So we took usage stats a while ago. We haven't done them since then, which I think we probably should. But when we checked in 2013, we took a sampling of the top 500 accessed volumes for a certain period in HathiTrust, and we tried to see how many of them had been opened by the copyright review projects. And we found out that 30% had been opened up, which I think is pretty telling, saying that 30% of top accessed volumes had been opened up through copyright review projects. And I also want to mention that just this summer, the copyright review projects, including all the institutions that have been working on them, all the reviewers as a group were awarded the ALA L. Ray Patterson Award for contributions to public domain environment for libraries. And we are very pleased and honored to be given that. We were the first group to receive that. It's usually given to an individual. And it's really thanks to all the contributions of HathiTrust partner institutions who have been participating in this work over the last 8 years that we are able to be recognized with this award. So on the last IMLS grant, we were funded to write a toolkit. If you have an interest in reading more in depth about the projects, the legal background, how we manage training, staffing, this is the document for you. It's open free at the provided URL, and you can also purchase a copy through Amazon. Not sure if you could interlibrary loan it, and we do anticipate having it put into HathiTrust soon, but I just checked and it's not there yet. So this toolkit was funded by IMLS, and it's definitely a long read, but a good one if you want more detail on the projects. So what do we work on? We work on a variety of books. It's all over the map. It's anything from research reports, agriculture, fiction, poetry, educational documents, finance, religion, you name it. If it's collected by a library and the metadata meets the scopes for the project, then it comes through our queue, and we have a random work queue, so you can see any number of things during the day that you're working. You never know what you're going to get. Some of it is very boring and some of it's very interesting. So it's all over the map. The reason why we do it this way instead of by topic or by collection is because it is definitely more efficient. It's efficient to scope it by country and by publication date, because then we can focus on one legal regime. And the value in HathiTrust in doing it this way is that we're pursuing a strategy of copyright review at a very large scale. And so this is what makes sense for us. We are only currently looking at book format. We're not looking at serials. And that's because we found that there were a lot of issues and questions with third-party material in serials. For example, I know a lot of publishers' weekly issues were never renewed. Copyright was not renewed, but in looking inside of them, there are potential works that could have been registered separately or could have had foreign authorship and photographs in them. And that's the kind of things that cause difficulty. We have so much other stuff to work on in monographs that is what we're focusing on right now. We have received researcher requests upon times, and where possible, we can try to accommodate that. If works are already identified as project candidates, we can attempt to raise them in, well, not attempt, we will raise them in priority so that they go to the top of the queue and get reviewed first. Some of the things that we have done have been in the state government information category, have been banking audits, banking reports, people doing research on government spending after the Great Depression. It's been state directories, things like that. We get requests sometimes for things that seem to be eligible for a project that we're currently running, but have not made it into candidates. The typical reason for something not to get picked up by a copyright review project is because of incomplete metadata. So really, really, we need to have a country of publication and we need to have a publication date. And without those things in the metadata, something is not going to get picked up by our algorithm that pulls together our candidate pools. So, how many volumes do we have in our candidate pools right now? We've already built our candidate pools for the project that we'll be working on. This is done by metadata poll, so we're looking at country of pub, as I said, publication date, and also we're looking for book format. And the candidate pool increases when we get new ingests. So we're currently at 130-some thousand total for both projects. We're expecting more. We're not quite sure how much more. The US monographic pool alone has increased by, I believe, 20,000 since last April. So it goes up in fits and starts when other institutions put in new works. So what we're doing to define our candidate pool is we pick a narrow enough scope that it makes sense to do. We're often trying to get one where we have enough candidates that'll take us 1 to 2 years to get through it. That's kind of what we have now. We have we're expecting about 2 years worth of work. It will, of course, depend upon how many volunteers we get. As I mentioned before, we're working on monographs only. We are only working on published works because that's the kind of legal regime we have researched. We've not scoped out and made decision tree and workflow for unpublished works. So, for example, some of the things that we do not work on, we try to filter out our dissertations because of we still have a continuing question on whether or not to consider those published or unpublished. And the copyright would depend upon that answer to that question. We also filter out of the queue things that have caused have complexity and have caused slowdown in our work. And the main things that we filter out are translations and non-English works. So, as I said, we completed the US candidate pool in 2014. When new ingest comes in, it gives us more to work on. One of the benefits of having worked on so many before is that anything that's a duplicate to something we've worked on before will automatically get matched up and inherit a rights determination. So those we don't actually have to put in any new work on, they get an inheritance. So our project goals coming up for the next 2 years are totally dependent upon how many volunteer reviewers we get. We will be working on 2 main projects, the US publications from 1923 to 1963. We have currently 78,000 awaiting review in that pool, and I think we're expecting more coming in, not sure how much more. For that pool, we are doing a check of the Stanford Copyright Renewal Database. And we also will be adding in ability to check and see copyright notice. Both of those things were formalities that were required during the 23 to 63 period for US publications. The second project will be state government documents, and a smaller subset being included in that are local documents as well. I believe those are city or county documents. For those, we are going to be going through 1977. There are 56,000 candidates in there currently. It's possible that there could be more in HathiTrust, but that just don't have the correct metadata to get picked up. So they have to have metadata identifying them as a state document in order to pick them up for review. These are going to be things like banking reports, directories, bulletins, state bulletins, legislative documents. Many of these were published without notice. We're getting about 70%, I think, was our return rate on public domain for these. And we're able to go through 77 because that copyright notice requirement was in effect, formality through 77. Let's see. So for US monographs, why are we just sticking to 23 to 63 right now? The renewal requirement was only through 63. After that, there was no renewal required. And so we are not checking for 1964 to 1977 yet, even though publication with notice was still a formality during that time. The primary reason for that is because it's too labor intensive. Unless we were able to filter out, to filter first for ones that were likely to not have copyright notice, we would be working through the entire pool. And I'm presuming most of the commercially published documents and books during that time period are going to have copyright notice. So first we have to get better at identifying which ones are likely to be published without notice. The state government documents are a known group of works that are likely to be published without notice, and that's why we're going ahead and reviewing those through 77. The same thing with 78 through March of 89. If published without notice, we could also find them public domain. However, there was a 5-year period for remedy and registration. So it is something that we could look at working on in the future. It would require a little bit more research, a little bit more work. So we're waiting on those, holding on those until we have a better way to scope and identify ones that are likely public domain to work on in those time periods. So that's it about the candidates that we're working on. I'm going to go ahead and stop for questions on the candidates.
And Christina, during your talk, Beth Camden from University of Pennsylvania asked a question which I've already addressed in the chat window, but I'll repeat it for the benefit of all. Beth asked, is it possible that the submitting library do copyright research before they submit, and I'm assuming that means materials, submitting materials to HathiTrust. And as I explained in the chat window at the time, libraries are certainly welcome to, and we would encourage people to do so. Unfortunately, the CRMS system really only accommodates reviews of works that have previously been scanned and are already deposited into HathiTrust. But I think that the methodologies we'll be talking about could be adapted for a workflow during the scanning process. So that was one question that came up, but we certainly have time for a couple of more, and you can type that into the chat window if you have one.
We have talked about being able to use the interface and provide it to other people for merely the functionality of submitting a determination, recording a determination, and having the Stanford renewal database search. However, you'd be working on reviews without the view of the book in front of you. And definitely having the digital scan is what makes this efficient for us.
Right.
There was a sample done at UT Austin of about 100 works from the Benson collection in Spanish language materials, I believe, and pulling, I believe it was there, they had to pull the physical volumes, and they commented on how long it took.
Yeah. We have a question here, I believe, from Michael at Library of Congress, and he writes, at Library of Congress, we're thinking about doing determination in advance of scanning. Is CRMS data available to avoid even checking works already cleared that we can link to in HathiTrust rather than digitize? And question actually is very clear, Michael. Just to repeat it, Christina, is the CRMS data available to avoid checking works already cleared so that they can just link to HathiTrust rather than digitize those works again?
We currently have our rights renewal records only kept internally. They are associated with a volume, and we are seeking ways to make that public and attached to the record, the volume record, but we're not there yet. I'm thinking probably what you could do is you'd have to be checking for duplicates. You'd have to submit the holdings and look for overlap. And perhaps it could be checked against what the rights status is in the rights database to see if it's already open.
Right. And I think also to add to that, if a work has been cleared by us, in other words, if we've identified it as being in full view status and out of copyright, then it is by definition already in HathiTrust, and a search of the HathiTrust catalog would identify the rights and view status of that particular work. But that might be cumbersome to do too. So if
Right.
there's, we could certainly entertain a conversation with Library of Congress about how to identify some of these and providing a little bit more bulk information on rights status to works. So. I am not seeing any other questions or signals that any are coming right now. So Christina, do you want to proceed?
Okay.
And then we will come back in a few minutes.
Sure. So now I'm going to talk about our approach, process, and participation. So the CRMS approach, we pull our candidate pool by metadata parameters. Our candidate pools are assembled by algorithm, and anytime something comes into HathiTrust, it's checked against that algorithm, and if it matches, it's automatically added. So we have our candidate pool going up daily if anything new comes in that matches. We do have legal research support from the Copyright Office at the University of Michigan. They have done legal research and written memos for us on the projects that we are working on. If we were to make any major changes, or if we were to go outside of what we are currently working on now, we would probably require them to check and do more legal research and advise us on creating workflow for any new countries, new time periods, anything outside of what we've already spec'd out to work on. So we have a good background already to go back to do the monographs 23 to 63 because the research has already been done. We've already worked on it. We have all the documentation. So that's one of the reasons also that makes it easy for us to continue with that. Once the legal research is done, we write a decision tree. We're attempting to simplify the copyright to yes/no questions, and that's because we do not ask for copyright expertise of reviewers. So they learn an awful lot about copyright once they're on the project, but really we're not looking to the level of having copyright experts, lawyers working on it. So we're working with just regular library people. And putting it into a decision tree helps manage that workflow and ensure consistent results. We do have a process, as Mike said, that we're only working from digital scans, and this is because of efficiency. We have been approached to try and review from physical volumes pre-digitization, and the amount of work just skyrockets when you're working from physical volumes. So digital scans are part of our methodology. We do 2 independent reviews per volume. If they conflict, then we also have an expert that adjudicates the conflict. And this helps keep our high confidence in accuracy of our reviews. So we also have a very strong tolerance for setting aside complicated volumes. I believe the number was around 30%. If there is complication, if it's taking too long, or if it's known that we can't exactly get the information we need to make a decision, we set stuff aside. And that is our UND undetermined category. Save it for a rainy day, come back to it later. And this helps us move quickly through and identify public domain stuff as quickly as we can. Our double review process, books are randomly served from the queue, and they go to 2 reviewers independently. We have some algorithms that define what is a match and what is a conflict. Oftentimes the conflicts are disagreements that in actuality are agreeing, like they will both say this should be closed, but disagree on the reason why. So then they go to an expert for a resolution if they are in conflict. If they are a match, then overnight that processing will export a determination and recommend it to the HathiTrust rights database, which will be updated. Anything that's public domain then will be opened up and fully viewable. We are making some changes to our process this time around based on what we learned from the first time. Part of it's due to a research project this summer that was done by Justin Bonfiglio at the US University of Michigan Copyright Office. He did some research on insert material, which would be like third-party material, photographs and stuff within a volume. And this was pulled from our undetermined category, the it's too complicated category. And what we were finding is that stuff had been set into that category without a full check of the renewal status in Stanford. And we thought, hey, we can do better than that. We can make sure we get a renewal check for everything. That way we are sure we have better data on the copyright status of the volume as a whole, regardless of whether there's photographs or other inserted material into it. So we're going to be switching the order in the decision tree of those. We're going to be putting a check for renewal prior to a check for inserts, and this will improve our data. We are also attempting to make that renewal information that we find more accessible. We'll work on any way we can to get that out and connected to volumes that are in HathiTrust, so that other people don't have to redo a search for what renewal record it was. So what we anticipate this will do to our public domain in copyright and undetermined stats. These are the stats that were from the prior US project. We anticipate that public domain should stay roughly the same, and that we may end up with more in copyright, and that would be pulling it from out of the undetermined and give us more determined to be in copyright by doing that Stanford database check first. The previous project was really highly focused on fast determination of public domain works. We may add a little bit of time to the process by making this change, but I think it's worth it at this point to have more determinacy of when there is a renewal. So this is our interface. This is what the reviewers log in and see. You've got in the center there is pulling from secure access to HathiTrust in copyright scans. It is secure access only by one IP address with a login, and it must be from a single workstation. So it's pretty locked down. Reviewers may only use this access for one purpose only, that is to do copyright review. So no reading the books. On the left-hand side is our CRMS copyright review kind of resources. At the top, we have toggle views between the sources that they're going out to search. On this project, it's primarily going to be the Stanford Copyright Database, and we also have links out to MARC records, and those try to do an automated search, and then from there, if that doesn't work, then reviewers have to modify and use their database searching skills. And the bottom part is where they record a decision. They will choose a rights reason code, enter renewal ID number, enter any notes about potential complications, and then they will submit. So this is the whole place where reviewers are doing their work. How much do we expect to be doing in a month? Well, these are the numbers from the first project and how much was done on the monographs 1923 to 1963. So as you can see, we were doing between 5,000 and 7,000 determinations average per month and getting to about 60,000 a year. We are aiming to finish currently, we have about 78,000 now in candidates, and we're aiming to finish it in 2 years, which means we would need to have enough participants to do about 3,600 a month. And that's adjusting for like the training period and when we will actually beginning having production come out of the copyright review projects. So if we get more participants than that, we'll be hitting those higher numbers. It just depends on what we get. Let's see here. Oh, and as you can see in like early 2014, we hit 0 on these candidates, and that's why all of the work dropped off. At that point, we switched everybody to over to working on the UK books, and that's why it's been sitting. It's been sitting and accruing candidates with nobody working on them for like the last 2 years. So we're ready to work on them again. Staffing, let's talk about what makes a good reviewer. So qualifications, it's actually not really about degrees and qualifications. We found some simple things that make a good reviewer. So it's basically somebody who is relatively easy at typing and able to navigate a computer. That's a lot of people in libraries these days. Has attention to detail. And in working on the Stanford Copyright Renewal Database, we will be looking for people who are adept at truncation and wildcard searching because we are trying to prove a negative. We're trying to prove a renewal does not exist, which means we want to be able to exhaust possibilities. And just somebody who has basic understanding of front matter publication of a book. So what we do not need is copyright expertise. We will train on that. Well, actually, what we found affects reviews more is having a minimizing distractions in the environment. So really, this is not a project to expect somebody to do while they're on the reference desk. You should probably have a dedicated time when it's quiet in the office, or you can shut your door, have headphones on. Need to have a widescreen monitor because the interface must be viewable without having to scroll up and down pages on the book. Otherwise, we found that people were missing things if they were trying to work off one of those really old square monitors. And we found that having 20 to 30% time commitment was the best option. So we're going to be training reviewers remotely. How long they're in training will depend upon how much time they put in. There will be a few dates that are scheduled for like conference calls, probably about 2 or 3. And then we will be recording those if somebody has a conflict. And beyond that, it's a lot of on your own work and then scheduling time with central staff to have one-on-one private tutoring sessions. We do have a sandbox system where people do practice reviews, and we will provide a wiki and we will provide a decision tree. So for supervisors, we are also able to provide statistics. We understand that this is part of somebody's job, and so you would like to perhaps be able to evaluate them. So we can provide statistics for reviewers, for supervisors upon request. Reviewers get to see this at any time. They can check their stats. Some are more into it than others on checking what they've done. And we can also provide help if you need statements for merit and evaluation of people annually. The timeline for our call for participation, we hope to close the call on October 15th. Up through then, we minimally just need your yes or no. You're going to be participating. If you know how many FTE, that's great. We don't actually need reviewer names until December 1. That's when we'll be asking for final names and time commitments. And then we'll be working then to get them scheduled with authorized access and making sure they've got everything set up on their computer to be able to work and be ready to start. The training for state government documents will begin earlier, and we're expecting only to have like 5 people on that. So we will need to find out earlier if anybody wants to work on state government documents. We're anticipating mid-November. For the rest of the group, we're going to be starting after ALA Midwinter on like the 25th of January, and it probably will progress through mid-March depending on how quickly people work through their own at-home or at-work homework. Mid-March, we expect people to be ready to move into production, and the determinations will start going out live to HathiTrust. So that's our timeline. If your institution does want to participate, we are currently accepting only HathiTrust members. Reviewers should commit to 1 year. We anticipate only running the training once next year. So if you miss it in January, probably the next time to join will be a year from then. And we're looking for a 20 to 30% commitment. And all you have to do is just email me, and I've been keeping a spreadsheet of people that are wanting to join. So if you, this is pie in the sky, I'm putting it out there because maybe somebody on the call today has an idea of how to do these. These are things that would really, really benefit copyright review, and we don't have them, and maybe somebody wants to work on them. So what we need is a searchable database of the catalog of copyright entries, or the CCE. We currently have a Stanford copyright renewal database, only covers Class A works, so monographic works, which is also another reason why we're only working on monographic works, because the rest of the classes that were registered, pamphlets, drama, those kinds of things, you would have to look through scanned pages. They're not generally very easily searchable. They are scanned at the Internet Archive, and they aren't HathiTrust, but it's a matter of flipping through pages in volumes. So anybody that wants to work on a searchable database for the CCE, let me know. We are looking for help in image or OCR recognition of the copyright symbol in front matter of HathiTrust volumes. How this would help will be if we want to start working on volumes after 77, it would be helpful to have an automated review ahead of the manual review to indicate this is likely to not contain a copyright symbol. That would help us be more efficient and be able to work on those. Also, it would be really helpful if somebody knows how to run an automated check of our candidate volume pool against the Stanford renewal database. So what I've heard from various people I've talked to is that string matching on the title and the author is very difficult. What this would do would help us move things that are presumably in copyright. If they have a match in Stanford, it would move it to the end of the queue and enable us to work first on things that are more likely to be public domain. So, and if it got good enough and was accurate enough, we might be able to have automated determination of in copyright volumes by a check. So that's my wish list. Other ways to help. If you are not going to contribute reviewers, there's still some ways that we would like your assistance. One would be in doing metadata corrections. So duplicate detection, better duplicate detection, saves us a great deal of effort. I forgot to look up the stats, but I think it's around 30% of our determinations are for duplicates. And we really want that to be automated, not manual. So that means that the metadata has to match up and that Zephyr can recognize that your volume is a duplicate to prior volumes. In that way, our inheritance process is able to automatically propagate rights for things that we've worked on before, instead of us having to do new manual review. A numcron, I'm not sure there's any way to solve this one, but the enumcron will cause issues, again, with our inheritance. So if you have VOL period 2 or a space in there, or V2, that can sometimes cause us to have to review each volume because we don't recognize that they're duplicates. So it's a problem we're working through. In some cases, when you make a metadata correction, you can affect the access even without having a manual copyright review take place. For example, U.S. federal documents. If you have that F in the 008 field for federal documents, that's going to trigger the automated bib algorithm that would open up federal documents. So you might want to look at any you've got that might need an F. For what documents in HathiTrust might you have permission to sign CC license and open them up in HathiTrust? We had some opened up by departments at our university, so maybe you have some as well that you might think about. Get your 23 and later volumes deposited. I know there's some that are working that have escrow volumes, looking to get them out and into HathiTrust. We'd love to have them. They will join our project the minute they're in. And also, I'd say remain engaged in the changing legal landscape. We've got potential changes coming up, maybe in Section 108 and in the oh shoot, I'm forgetting what it is now. You know, there's a notice. Yep, it's gone. Anyhow, pay attention. In 2019, the 1923 volumes will start becoming public domain, and we'll have beginning to have a rolling wall again. So we're hoping that that stays the case. So just be engaged. How you can find out more is here, and we will be taking questions right now. I think there's some in the chat box. You can go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can turn on your audio and ask questions as well.
Great. Thanks, Christina. This is Mike. I just wanted to mention, I think the U.S. Copyright Office has been proposing a lot of different legislative changes this year. One of them, notable one being, maybe this was it, to have them removed from the Library of Congress and become an independent agency, which is something lots of folks are not real thrilled about. We did have one question during your discussion, Christina, and I'll just repeat it here. I did respond to it. And that is it possible to have two staff members split 10 to 15% duties? Christina, do you want to address that? I did provide a comment in the window, but you may be able to provide some more insight there.
Yeah, I agree with you that we developed the 20 to 30% guideline. I'd say if that's what you have to offer, 50%, 15%, we could talk about it. I would be willing to talk about it. What we found with lower percentages is that we had more drop off of people stopping reviewing, and they would just disappear and not work. So that was not ideal for us. Or reviewing at low amounts, always having to I find that when I've been away for a long time, it is slow for me to get back into a groove. So, you know, having about 8 hours a week or more is just good to keep. It's like a skill that you practice, like an instrument. Just having it a couple hours a day really helps keep it up and keep it refreshed.
Are there any other questions?
Howdy, this is Rob McGeehan from Texas A&M University Libraries. I've been working on digitizing the Texas State Agricultural and Extensions Service serial documents for about 10 years now, and we've already got pretty much the experiment station bulletins, and we're in the middle of the extension bulletins now. Previously, I've gone to the experiment station and extension directors, and I've got signed copyright clearance forms for 11 total serial titles already. And when I tried to send them in previously in bulk, they said, oh no, just hang on to them until you're actually depositing a particular serial title and send them in that now. Is that still the case? Or could I go ahead and get you working on freeing up 10 more titles of Texas documents?
Bob, can I just ask a quick question for clarification? Are any of those titles or any items in those series already in HathiTrust?
Yes,
Oh, they
All
are.
of
Okay.
them are most of them are already in HathiTrust. I know you have at least 4 different titles out of these series that are already in.
Okay. We can follow back up on that. I think, Christina, you may have another thought on this, but I think it could be that if we were, I think possibly what someone was thinking was if you were going to be depositing more titles, more volumes over time, it might be easier for us to do larger bulk at one time. But we can take another look at this. I don't know the specifics of what you had submitted, so but if you want to drop us a quick note just to give us a little bit more detail so we can find this in our tracking system, Bob, that would be helpful. So,
Okay.
thanks.
And yes, I do anticipate that we will be depositing more of them over time. We tend to send in about 300 or 400 at a time from a particular series. So it took 3 different batches to do the experiment station bulletin,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be probably the same number for the extension bulletins. And it may be that indeed it's easier for them to just wait until they've got all of a title and then free them all up.
Mm-hmm.
So I know
Mm-hmm.
that happened with the experiment station is when we finally got the last of them in, then boom, they unlocked all 1,200 at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I think the point is that sometimes it's easier for us to act at one point to flip that switch, because what we're doing, we usually change the status on volume by volume, even though the title we might know the entire run of the title is going to be open. Um, Often when it comes in and the bib data tells us we think it should be in copyright, we have to manually flip it, and remembering to do that is possibly the issue that people were raising
Mm-hmm.
with that. So, but please do just, if you don't mind, just drop us a quick note. You can use the email addresses there or use feedback at issues at HathiTrust.org, and we'll follow up just to make sure we're clear on what we can and can't do right now. So.
Yep. And if you had prior contact, we'll probably have that on record in our ticketing system, so we can follow up.
There is a question here from Laura asking, did I understand that only one workstation could be used per person? Was hoping to do some of this work on my home computer, some of it at work. And I think just to clarify, what we do require with this is that access be made from a machine with a static IP address. And that has tended to be just one workstation that can have that static IP address. We have this right now in lieu of two-factor authentication. What we're really trying to do is limit the possibility of in copyright items being inadvertently accessed for purposes other than copyright review. So it is honestly, I'll just say up front, it might be a bit of a pain to do this. We're doing this really out of an abundance of caution and to ensure our security is as strong as we can make it.
Yeah, I know that's a problem for some of our people as well who do telecommuting on Fridays. So they have to manage their work on copyright review Monday through Thursday, and then just know that they can't do it from home.
Yeah. I mean, I will say it's something that we would like. I mean, even this is true even of our own staff. Actually, to be clear, that even our own staff are limited to specific IP addresses, and there's certain things I can't do but at work. This is not necessarily ideal, but given what we have with our current authentication methods, that's where we are. So. It is 4:05 on the East Coast. I think we should probably give people one more chance to ask any questions they might have, but if they don't, then we might want to start wrapping this up.
Yep. And you can always email me or give me a call. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that has additional questions. Again, all we need is just like a basic yes or no by October 15th if your institution thinks they want to participate. And if you have questions about how that would work and what the time commitment is and what training would look like, please feel free to drop me a line.
I guess I would just like to say one more time how important it is to me and to all of us at HathiTrust that the membership is so interested in this work and has been over time. And even if you don't feel that you can participate in this project in the future, I think just your interest in it is much appreciated. And we'd love to be able to talk to you about other ways that other ideas you might have for us too. So that's pretty much all I have for the day, Christina. Is there any last words you want to add?
Yeah, I agree. It's very exciting to see so many people interested in copyright. I guess it affects everybody's access. So, you know, more public domain volumes to download and read. So I don't see any more. I'm not seeing any more questions unless somebody else can see one.
I do not see one.
Okay.
All right.
All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I'll be sending slides out to anybody that is registered, and the recording hopefully works. So, so thank you very much. Contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Yep, y'all have a good